Here we go with Parshat Chayei Sarah. It's Parsha which focuses on pretty much one major story, but still certainly filled with very significant lessons that we can apply to our lives. We'll start at the very beginning. Perek Chav Gimel Pasuk Aleph. Vayiyu Chayei Sarah Me'ah Shana Ve'esrim Shana Ve'sheva Shanim. Sarah lived for 127 years. She's passing away. Shnei Chayei Sarah. These were the years of Sarah's life. What is the reason for those extra words, Shnei Chayei Sarah? You've just said that she lived 127 years. We know those are the years of her life. Why does it say these are the years of her life when we know that? Says Rav Hirsch, all these years, all 127 years, are called Sarah's life. She lived in all of them. The whole of her 127 years existence was life, a lively, cheerful, important, good life. No moment of it that she would have had to wish not to have been there. This is unbelievable. We all know that Sarah lived a very difficult life. She went for most of her life begging God for a child, wasn't blessed with a child. Her husband marries someone else, has a child. She has strife with Hagar. And then finally, at the age of 90, she is blessed with Yitzchak. There's a struggle between Yitzchak and Ishmael. And eventually, Ishmael has to be thrown out. She did not have an easy life. You can imagine that for some of those 90 years before Yitzchak was born, that Sarah would say, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I wasn't suffering. She certainly would not be cheerful, as Rav Hirsch explained. She wouldn't be fully living life, but yet she did. Shnei Chayei Sarah. Her entire life was life, vibrant, happy, and that's what those extra words are coming to teach us. The Mishnah says in Pirkei Avot, Perek Daled, Mishnah Aleph, Ezahu Ashir Hasameach Bechelko. The person who is happy is the person who's happy with their portion. That's who's wealthy. What wealth? It's not a question of the money that you have, but it's a question of being sameach bechelko. Because you can have all the money in the world and not be happy and just want more and think that you're somehow being cheated out of what you think you deserve. The real wealthy person is someone who is happy with what they have. That is Sarah Imenu. Here she is living without a child, suffering because she doesn't have a child, and yet she was able to say, Shnei Chayei Sarah. She lived them to the fullest. It's a hard thing for us to work on. Life is filled with its challenges. It's certainly filled with moments where we wish things weren't the way they were. And nevertheless, we have to learn from Sarah. We have to recognize that this is the way to truly live our lives. And I once came across a book which I feel gave a perspective which really helps to tackle this challenge. It's a book called The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck. And listen to what he says. Life is difficult. This is a great truth, one of the greatest truths. It is a great truth because once we truly see this truth, that life is difficult, we transcend it. Once we truly know that life is difficult, once we truly understand and accept it, then life is no longer difficult. Because once it is accepted, the fact that life is difficult no longer matters. He basically says, if we wake up in the morning and we expect everything to go our way today, everything's going to be wonderful, then we're going to be miserable when things don't go our way as they usually do. But if we wake up with no expectations, nothing is coming to me, I recognize that today is going to be filled with challenges and difficult. Then when that happens, that's just life. And when you're blessed with wonderful things and moments that aren't challenges, or even a day that just goes your way, that's the greatest blessing, and you can certainly rejoice in that. It's a total shift in perspective. I know today will be challenging, and when it is, it is. And if it's not, wonderful, and you can certainly rejoice with that. That is the lesson of Shnei Chayei Sarah, of Sarah's life. Every single moment of her life, every single year, even when it was difficult and painful, she was happy to be there and able to focus on the good that she had and not focus on what she didn't have, recognizing that this is what life is for. It is challenging, and that's the level that we have to strive for as well. And Scott Peck's advice is a great way to reach that sameach b'chelko. Because whenever good comes, you can celebrate and truly embrace. And when things are challenging, that's just the way it is, because we know that's the way it is. And as Peck says, we can transcend it. It's lesson number 1 from this week's Parsha. Continuing right in the beginning of the Parsha, it's going to be packed. The first few psukim, Perek Chav Gimel Pasuk Bet. Sarah passes away. Vayavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah. Abraham comes to eulogize Sarah, v'liv kota, and to cry over the fact that she passed away. And certainly the eulogy led to that crying. But the word livkota, which talks about Abraham crying, has a chaf. The letter chaf in kota is small. If you look at any Sefer Torah, it's very small compared to the rest of the words. What we call a kaf ze'ira, a chaf tana. Says the Baal HaTurim, why is that chaf small? He says, shelo bacha ela ma'at. When Avraham Avinu cried for Sarah, the little chaf comes to tell us he only cried a little bit. He wasn't overwhelmed with his crying and wasn't overwhelmed with grief that led to great crying and sobbing. Why? His wife had just passed away. Why does the Torah go out of its way to tell us how much Abraham cried and that it wasn't a huge amount? Rashi tells us on Pasuk Gimel, on Chaf Gimel Gimel, that why is the story of Sarah's death right next to the Akedah? Lefisha al yedei b'surat ha'akedah. When Sarah heard the news that Abraham took Yitzchak to kill him, to slaughter him, as God had commanded him, shenizdame b'nal shchita, that he was being taken to shchita b'kim'at shelo nishchat, and it almost happened that he was almost shechted. It almost happened. Parcha nishmata mimena, she was overwhelmed by this, umeta, and she passed away. This just magnifies the tragedy for Avraham Avinu. Not only does Sarah die, but she dies because he went to do the Akedah. Here he is doing this ultimate act for God, and his wife dies because of it. According to many, this is the last nisayon that Avraham Avinu had to experience. How does that relate to Abraham crying? It says in the Tivat Shalom, the Slonim Rebbe, he says, "V'yesh levar henya, dehine anu mevakshim b'tfilah." We say in davening, we say, "Haser Satan milfanenu or me'acharenu." We ask Hashem to take the Satan away from us, in front of us and behind us. Now, in front of us, we understand. If I want to go do a mitzvah, please make sure the Satan doesn't get in the way, the Yetzer Hara doesn't get in the way and stop me from doing the mitzvah. We have midrashim that talk about all the things, all the obstacles that were put in Abraham's way. As he went to the Akedah, Abraham fought through them. Haser Satan milfanenu. That we understand. What does it mean that Hashem should remove the Satan and the Yetzer Hara me'acharenu, from behind us? Says in the Tivat Shalom, Yesh bechinat Satan me'acharenu. What is that? Hitgabrut hayetzer la'achar hamasa. There's a Yetzer Hara that can kick in even after you performed the mitzvah. How is that? And he uses the example of the Akedah. K'dei levalvel Avram Avinu, to confuse and trouble Avram Avinu. Sheyidag v'titcharet, that he'll regret al ma'asehu, the act that he did in the Akedah. V'yeh bechinat toha al ma'asim tovim she'asa. Hashem tested Abraham with the Yetzer Hara after the Akedah. He already passed the test of the Akedah. But now Sarah dies, specifically because of the Akedah. Now Abraham can start to regret the mitzvah that he did. Why did I do that? Why did I take this step? Look what happened as a result. Sarah died. And that was the test that Avraham Avinu had of the Satan me'acharenu. That after you do a mitzvah, and there are negative things that happen afterwards, maybe you'll start questioning, should you have done the mitzvah or not? Avraham Avinu, Amad Gaba Nisayon Hazeh. He withstood this challenge, he overcame it, and he passed this test. This is what the Tivat Shalom says is meant by Vayavo Abraham Lispod V'Liv Kota B'Kav Ze'ira. Why is there a small chaf? Shalo Bacha Aleha Elama'at. Kiderech shebochim al askenim v'lo kamo shebochim al ason. Avram Avinu accepted. Sarah died because this was her time to die, and this would have happened no matter what. And he avoided the temptation of saying, why did I do this mitzvah? And he didn't want anybody to think that he was sad about the mitzvah. And therefore, he cried a little bit. The way you cry over someone who reaches their age, they're an older person, she's 127 years old. Of course, there's sadness, but it's not the grief that overtakes a person when they experience a tragedy. An unbelievable lesson number 2 from the parsha that we learn over here from Avram Avinu. He didn't question Hashem. I just did this mitzvah for you, and that led Sarah to die. I accept. It's the will of Hashem for Sarah to die. And anyway, this is her time to pass away. And he makes sure to demonstrate that by not crying too much, not indicating at all to anyone that perhaps he had regret over the mitzvah that he did. Many people feel, oh, I'm living my life in accordance with what Hashem wants. I'm doing mitzvot, I'm davening, I'm keeping halacha, I'm learning Torah. This can happen in the case of Balei Tshuva, people who came back from not being religious, and there might be a feeling or an expectation. I'm doing all that Hashem wants. Now let the good times begin. Where are the brachot? And yet you experience challenges. A person might go to do a mitzvah because they did a mitzvah, they lost something because of it. Do we regret doing the mitzvah? Do we question God, why did I lose out because I did the mitzvah? The lesson of Avram Avinu is no. We do the mitzvot, we do what Hashem commands, and we accept whatever happens along the way with no level of questioning and no level of regret over the mitzvot that we have performed. Moving on to lesson number 3. Rashi tells us in Breshit Perek Vav, Pasuk Tet, contrast Noach and Avram Avinu. Noach tzarich sa'ad l'tomcho. Noach needed help to support him in his relationship with Hashem. Aval Abraham mitchazek u'mahalech b'tzidko me'elav. Abraham needed no support from Hashem. He was there, committed fully, close to Hashem, without any support needed from Hashem. It's really hard to understand that because we know that Noach is the only person in Breshit Vav Tet. It says that he was an ish tzaddik. He's the only person in the Torah who's called a tzaddik. Avram Avinu is not crowned as a tzaddik. Where do we see this distinction between Noach and Abraham, talking about that Noach needed a crutch to stay close to Hashem, and Abraham Avinu did not? It's straightforward in our parsha. Perek Chav Gimel, Psukim Bet and Gimel, it says Sarah died, and Abraham came to eulogize her, as we've mentioned. And after that, Vayakam Abraham me'al pnei meto. Abraham picks himself up, and he keeps on going. And he buys the land in Hebron. We'll talk about that in a moment. He then goes to make sure that Yitzchak is able to get married. Life goes on. He accepts the decree of Hashem and keeps on going. Noach comes out of the Teva. Breshit Perek Tet, Psukim Chaf and Chaf Aleph. Vayachel Noach ish hadama vayitakerem. He plants a vineyard. Vayesh min hayayin vayishka. He becomes drunk. Noach was not able to handle what he had experienced. The world is destroyed. As a result, he is completely distraught. And he plants a vineyard, he gets wine, and he becomes drunk. That's the difference. The person who is distraught and brought down and not able to function because of the challenges of life, or the person who says, there's a will of Hashem, Vayakam Avraham, I'm going to keep on going, and he moves forward. Let's keep going with life. Buying land in Eretz Yisrael, getting a place for the future here in Eretz Yisrael, making sure that there's a future, a wife, so that there's more generations coming from Yitzchak. That's the attitude of Avram Avinu, and that's the lesson for all of us. That's the true measure of how close a person is with Hashem, how we deal with it when things don't go our way, not how we deal with it when things are going our way. And that is the lesson that we have to learn of again from here, from Avram Avinu. It's our national story. The Jewish people have proven as a nation that we are capable of doing this over and over again. We've proven this point. And the challenge for us is to be like Avram Avinu as individuals. Something happens, of course we cry. And of course we mourn. And of course, we confront it head on. It's a basic fundamental of how we deal with sad things that happen. But then, vayakam, we get up and we keep on moving in our lives. That is the way of Avraham Avinu, and that is certainly lesson number 3 from this week's Parsha. Vayakam Avraham me'al pnei meito. He didn't let his life be destroyed by the loss, but after mourning and crying, he picked himself up, and that's the way we have to be as well. We just mentioned Avraham Avinu buying the land in Hebron, Perek Chav Gimel, Psukim Yud Tet Achaf. Va'achrei chen kavar Avraham et Sarah ishto. He buries her in Meratz Machpelah, Hu Hebron, and the Torah makes it official. Vayakam hasadeh v'hamara asher bo la'Avraham la'achuzat kavar me'et pneicha. Avraham bought this land. It's there in the Torah in black and white. He buys this land in Hebron. And Avraham Avinu went out of his way to do so, even though it was offered to him for free. Says the Midrash, Breshit Rabbah, Ayin Tet Yud Zayin, Echad Mishloshet HaMekamot. This is one of the 3 places. She'ein umot ha'olam yicholim lo nodet Yisrael. They can't come and make a claim against the Jewish people. V'lomar gozel gzulam hem biyadchem. That these lands are stolen from you. The nations of the world can't do that with Hebron, because Avraham Avinu bought Hebron, and the Torah emphasizes that for us. What are the other 2? Hashnayim ha'acherim. Beit HaMikdash, Ukroto Shel Beit Yosef. This is really unbelievable. The 2 other places where it says straight out that we bought the land are the Makom HaMikdash, if you'll excuse me for saying so, East Jerusalem, as it's identified by the world, and the burial place of Yosef, which is Shechem, today called Nablus. The 3 most contested areas in Eretz Yisrael, Hebron, Shechem, Har HaBayit, Mizrach Yerushalayim, those are the 3 places where we went out of our way to make sure to have them. So just first and foremost, when reading these psukim, we have to be filled with a conviction that these places are ours. How we deal with them and deal with the nations around us, I am not getting into politics over here, and every single person can have their own opinion. But make there be no mistake about it. We have to know that these are lands which our ancestors purchased. Avraham Avinu bought this land in Hebron. The land in Shechem was bought. The land in Yerushalayim was bought. And these are things that we have to know and have clarity about. But it's more than just the fact that they were bought. These lands have significance. We'll just focus for now on Hebron. Why did Avraham Avinu want specifically the land of Hebron? Says the Midrash in Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, Perek Lamed Vav, Kasher ratz Abraham lahavi ben bakar lo orachim. When Abraham ran to go get that cattle, to get the meat prepared for his guests in last week's Parsha, Barach lefanav, the animal ran. That's why he was running. V'nichnas l'marat ha'machpelah, and it entered into Marat ha'machpelah in Hebron. V'nichnas achar of Sham, Avraham Avinu entered into the cave. U'matza Sham Adam v'Chava. Avraham sees Adam and Chava, shochvim al hamitot, laying there. The Yeshenim, they're sleeping. V'neirot dolkim aleihem, and there are lights that are lit around them. V'reach tov aleihem kareach nichoch, and there's this beautiful smell, like the sweet smell of the incense. Avraham Avinu saw that there was something special about Marat HaMachpelah. There were Adam and Chava, the candles, the smell, and the Zohar sure enough tells us, Hapetach harishon nechneset haneshama. When the neshama leaves the world, how does it make its way out of this world? B'merat HaMachpelah, via the cave of our patriarchs in Hebron. Shehi smucha legan Eden. This is the closest place to Gan Eden on earth. Whole new reality about what Hebron is. And this is not just some political pawn. This is a place of immense holiness, which according to our tradition, however we understand what that means, that it's the doorway to Gan Eden, the closest place to Gan Eden, the neshama goes there, whatever that means, the Pirkei Eliezer says it, the Zohar says it, and we have to recognize that it has that significance. There's a closeness to Hashem, to Gan Eden, that the neshama can feel and experience in Hebron. By the way, the word Hebron comes from the word chibur. There's a strong connection that's there. We have to learn that from this parsha and understand in our discussions about Hebron that it has this kind of significance. Certainly lesson number 4 that we should take from this week's parsha about the significance and the depth of meaning that Hebron has for the Jewish people. We move on. Avraham Avinu, part of his getting up after Sarah died, was trying to find a wife for Yitzchak. Perach Chavdal, Psukim Gimel and Daled, Vashbiachai. He makes Eliezer swear, Vashem Elkei Hashemayim Elkei Aretz, Asher lo tikach isha livni mibnot Kanani. Do not take a wife from the girls of Canaan, where we're living today, but rather ki el artzi, the el molada titelech. Go to my homeland, back home in Haran, lakachti isha livni Yitzchak. Take a wife from Yitzchak. Why? Why is it so important to get a wife from Haran? It's not as if they were monotheistic there. They were idolaters there as well. Why does it matter? Says Rav Hirsch the following words. When Abraham rejected the daughters of Canaan and wished for a girl from Aram for his son, we must remember that in Aram too, the people were idolaters. They were idolaters. So that his reason must have been not the idolatry of Canaan, but only the general moral degeneracy of the land. Idolatry, says Rav Hirsch, is primarily an error of the mind, an intellectual error, which can be corrected and cured. But moral degeneration gets a grip on the whole nature of a person, on the whole depth of his feelings and thoughts. And there, even in Abraham, in that land where people were morally degenerate, cannot hope to find a modest, morally pure, innocent girl for her son, who could bring with her the nobility of fine feelings and morals as a pearl for his home. Unbelievable. Idolatry we can deal with. But the midot, the morality, the values, that is something which has to come from the home, and that cannot be changed even by an Avraham Avinu. That's what he was looking for. The man who is spreading monotheism in the world is able to understand that she might come from idolatry. He'll change that. She'll change. She'll embrace monotheism. But if she has any kind of immorals, she has bad values, she doesn't have positive character traits, there's no hope. Such an important lesson for us to learn in general about what our priorities should be, but most importantly, even when we're talking about shidduchim, for our children, for our grandchildren, what's important. So often we ask the questions about, how wealthy can they be? What's their profession? How smart are they? And what's truly important we see from the story is not necessarily the mind, but it's most importantly that be a good person. That's the key to a successful marriage, is the midot and how the husband and wife will relate to one another. That's the key to them creating a family that's going to be a good, giving family, spiritual family, I would even say. It's all about the midot, it's all about the values, and it's all about the morality. And that's what we learn from Avraham Avinu's choice, and that is certainly lesson number 5 from the Parsha. That theme sort of continues into lesson number 6, as we see the exact test that is set up for Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzchak. We were always taught that the test was, will she be kind? Will she be kind and give water to him and to the camels? But let's go a step further here, because if you read the Parsha very, very carefully, we are going to see that the actual test is a little bit different than what we've been taught. Look, for example, at Perek Chavdal, Psukim Yudalad, Yudzayin, Yudchet, Mem Gimel, Mem Vav, over and over again. What does Eliezer say? When he sets out the test, he doesn't say the woman who gives me water. He says the woman ve'amra, who says, I'm going to give you water. Says? Why do we care about what she says? We care about what she does. And that thing continues over and over again. When it actually happens, it says, and sure enough, she came and she said, Vatomer Shetei. She said it. And when Eliezer repeats the whole story to Lavan and tells the whole story, he emphasizes again what she said. Amra, ve'amra elai, Vatomer Shetei. Why do we care about what she says? And the Torah emphasizes that over and over again. What we should care about is what she does. My great-grandfather, Rav Eli Melech Fishman, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Bracha, who was killed in the Holocaust on Shavuot night in 1944, and his Sefer Lechem Abirim Ala Torah gives a beautiful answer to this question. We have a Gemara in Tanit, Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, where it tells the story of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum Ish Gamzu was a person who suffered terribly. He had medical issues all over his body, horrific what he was suffering. Why did that happen? He tells the story. And he says, I was traveling and we had donkeys and I had things with me, with food and drink and all kinds of other things. And ba'ani echad va'mali b'derech, a poor person stood there on the way. Well, Amrli Rebbe Parnaseni, they said, Rebbe, give me food. And Amardi lo, I said, Hamtein ad she'efrok min hachamor, I'm coming off the donkey. And he got off the donkey, and by the time he got off the donkey, the poor man died. And because of that, Nachum Ish Gamzu asked God to afflict his body with all kinds of suffering from head to toe. Why? What did he do wrong? He said, I'm getting off the donkey. He was planning to give the person water. Say some of the commentaries on that Gemara, because he didn't have the sensitivity to say, I'm giving you water. All he said was, wait till I get off the donkey. What happens then? This is a poor person who's desperate for a drop of water. All he needed to hear was Nachum say, I'm giving you water. I'll hear that word water, and it'll keep him going for the next few minutes till that water comes. That is what Nachum Ish Gamzu felt was his failing in this story and why he asked to be punished for it. Says my great-grandfather, Zecher Tzadak V'Kadosh L'Bracha, that's what Eliezer was looking for in a spouse for Yitzchak. To enter the home of Avraham Avinu, it's not enough just to be a person who does the chesed. People do chesed. To have the sensitivity to realize these people are traveling, and she says, I'm giving you water, and then gives the water. That's the level of sensitivity, realizing the person just needs to hear the word, water is coming. And that's what he was looking for, because he understood the extra level of chesed of Avraham Avinu, and that's what he was looking for in Rivka. And sure enough, Rivka rose to the occasion, and she actually came forward with that statement, and she actually said it, and she actually did it, and Eliezer very much valued that and even mentions it when he tells the story over afterwards. We are children of Avraham Avinu. We're not just expected to do chesed. We're expected to do super chesed, to always be thinking, how can we go the extra mile to help someone who is in need? That is what is expected from the descendants of Avraham Avinu, and that's the lesson that we learn from over here. Unbelievable lesson in terms of the sensitivity that we have to have while we're doing the act of chesed, to go the extra mile and see how can we help people even further. That's another lesson that we can learn from Avraham Avinu and certainly have to put into our lives. That's lesson number 6, that extra level of sensitivity to make sure that all the needs of the person that we're helping are truly met, and we're going overboard in terms of making sure that they are comfortable and feel that they're being taken care of. By the way, Avraham Avinu was a person who thought about everyone all the time, and we have it mentioned in 2 different sources in this week's Parsha, the sensitivity that he had to make sure that he wasn't hurting anybody else. Just as an example, it says in Breshit Chavdal and Yud, and this is going to be lesson number 7, Eliezer took camels, migmalei adonav, from the camels of his master. Why the camels of his master? Says Rashi, Nikarin hayu mishag malim shahayuz yotzin zmumim. You knew they were Avraham Avinu's camels. Why? Because they were muzzled. Mibnei hagezel shelo yiru b'stot acherim. He wanted to make sure that his camels, his animals, were not going to eat the food the crops that belong to other people. And it happens again later in the parsha. We were up to in the parsha now, when he comes to Lavan's house, it says, "Vayavo ish habayta per chavdavid pasuk lamed bet vayiftach hagmalim." What do you mean he opened up the camels? What is that? Says Rashi, Hitir zamam shalehem. He opened up their muzzles. Shahya sotemet pihem. Eliezer kept them muzzled. Shelo yiru b'derech b'stot acherim. So when they're on the road, they wouldn't take any food from other people. An incredible level of sensitivity. And what's amazing is, Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz points out, we know though that there's a promise that the animals of tzaddikim won't do anything wrong. The Gemara in Chulin Daf Ham and Beis, the Hemden shel tzaddikim, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe takal yadan. So what was Avraham worried about? Right? There's a promise that tzaddikim's animals won't do anything wrong. Avraham Avinu is not taking any chances. It is so important to him to make sure that he's not guilty of the slightest bit of gezel, taking something from someone else, and therefore he makes sure that his animals are muzzled. He's not going to rely on the miracle and the promise that nothing bad will happen through his animals. That was the care that he had for other people's things. What an incredible lesson, lesson number 7 from the Parsha, from Avraham Avinu about the concern that we have to have for things that belong to other people, to make sure that we're using them with permission, to make sure that when we use them, we make sure that they don't get destroyed in any way, no damage is caused, to care about other people's things the way we care about our own things. Lesson number 7 from Avraham Avinu. Moving on, we get towards the end of the Parsha. Rivka is now on her way into Eretz Yisrael. Says the Torah, Perek Chavdal and Pasuk Samach Gimel, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot erev. It was towards evening time, and Yitzchak Avinu went out lasuach basadeh. What is lasuach basadeh? Says the Gemara in Brachot Daf Chavav Amabet. Yitzchak tikein tefillat mincha. Yitzchak Avinu established the mincha prayer that we say in the afternoon. Shene'emar vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot erev. He went out to speak, to have a conversation in the field. Ve'ein sicha ela tefillah. These are 4 words that have to impact us on a daily basis. Ein sicha ela tefillah. What is davening? Davening has to be a conversation. We are communicating with God. It's not just opening up the siddur and saying the words that are there. There's an importance to the fixed prayers that we say. There's a reason why they were authored in the way that they're authored, and they have a power to them. But for real tefillah, it has to be a sicha, your own personal, individual, heartfelt conversation with God. Says the Rambam in Hilchot Brachot, Perek Vav, Halachot Bet and Gimel, Iba lomar achar tfilato afilu keseder vido yom kippurim omer. When davening is over, pour your heart out to God. Yes, you've done the fixed prayer, and that's great. But there's so much more that you have to do. You have to have the sicha. You have to communicate with God. At the end of Shmoneh Esrei, pour your heart out. If it's easier for the middle brachot in Shmoneh Esrei to say a special tefillah related to the tefillah, you can do that. And he even gives the example. In Rifa'enu, you ask for that tefillah, the refuah shlema. If you need parnasah, you do it in the Birchat Hashanim. In Shema Kolenu, in Shomei Tefillah, ask for anything that you want. Or at the end of Shmoneh Esrei, you can do so. But turn your tefillah into a sicha. It should not be something we just do by rote and just to fulfill the obligation and check off the box. Here I've said the words. There has to be that moment of communication from yourself to Hashem. And I want to tell all of you, especially those of you who have children and grandchildren, as a teacher, when I teach this to my students, it transforms their davening. Literally, I'll be honest with you, it transformed davening for me. Until then, davening is saying the same words every single day, which becomes boring and unexciting. Wait a minute, I can say my own words. I can turn to God and really close my eyes and communicate with Him and have a sicha. Now I can't wait for davening. I can't wait for davening because there's so many things that I want to talk to Him about, and here's my opportunity to do so while in the midst of Shmoneh Esrei. That's taking our davening and turning it to sicha. If you teach this to your children, to your grandchildren, to your students, it will energize them and enthuse them about prayers. Rabbi Tversky, in one of his books, Generation, has a beautiful, beautiful paragraph where he says, something he saw, a man went up to the kotel. He leaned forward and gave it an affectionate kiss. Then he began his dialogue with God. Yes, a dialogue. For although only one voice was audible, he knew that he had a responsive listener. He spoke directly, respectfully, with great clarity, exactly as if the conversation were with a person. That's what he saw. Says Rav Tversky, I turned back to continue reciting the Tehillim, my Psalms, realizing that I had never really prayed before. Prayer has to be a sicha. And can you imagine a few times a day we turn to God and we talk to Him, we communicate with Him, the way that strengthens our bond with God. And also, I must say, gives a chance for our tefillot to be heard because we're really communicating them and not just saying words which have power and have meaning, but it's not the same as saying it on your own. Lesson number 8 from this parsha, Yitzchak went out, lasuach basadeh. Our tefillot have to be a communication, a dialogue with God, and I encourage all of you, your next Shmoneh Esrei, if you haven't done this or don't do this regularly, Find the right time in Shemona Esrei. For me personally, it's the end of Shemona Esrei, but everybody find your time, either a bracha that relates to your prayer, or anything in Shema Koleinu, or anything at the end of Shemona Esrei before you step out, before you say the words Yula Ratzoni Mrefi at the end. Talk to God. I promise you, it'll transform your tefillah experience, and it'll make it into a sicha the way davening is really supposed to be. Finally, lesson number 9, which really relates back to the first lesson that we have, but it's a pasuk that really hits me. Parak Chavhei Pasuk Hey, Avraham Avinu passes away. Vayigva Vayamat Avraham. Avraham died. Beseva Tova. He was filled. He was full. He lived life to the fullest, but more than that, Sava, he felt satisfied. Zakein V'Saveya. He was older, but he was satisfied. Vayesef El Hamav, parenthetically, he was gathered to his nations, a proof from the Torah of continuing life afterwards, Tchiat HaMeitim, going to be with those people who passed before him. But this word, B'Seva Tova, and more importantly, V'Saveya. He was satisfied. He was filled. We all want to be people who, whenever our time comes to leave this world, we can say that we are filled. We've spent our lives doing meaningful things. And even if it's at work, make it something that you enjoy. Make it something where you're contributing. And you can say at any given moment, I am filled. I'm living life to the fullest. I am sameach b'chalko, going back to that idea of Sarah imenu, but focusing more on this idea of being satisfied. I'm satisfied because I took a life and I did something with it. We're not focusing now on what Hashem gives to us and being happy with that as we did with Sarah, but here it's what Avraham did with his life. And Avraham had a difficult life and a challenging life. And we all know that. And he didn't leave a huge family behind him, but he spent his life teaching. He spent his life touching others. He spent his life doing chesed, and he was able to feel filled and satisfied when he passed away. And all of us want to be in that position. We don't know. Bezrat Hashem, it should be after 120, but let's make every day a day which we fill with meaning. And we go to sleep at night satisfied with how we spent our day, with how we contributed to the world that day, what we gave to our family, to others around us. That way we can be like Avraham Avinu and really be Saveya, feel filled and satisfied when we finish with our lives. So we went through a whole group of lessons. Again, we had 9 lessons this week. Lesson number 1, going back to the beginning, we had the idea of being sameach b'chalko, like Sarah, Shnei Chayei Sarah, every single year, every single day, even when she was sad and down and suffering, she was happy to be alive, and she didn't want to be anywhere else. And the idea of Scott Peck, life is difficult. Be prepared for those challenges, and then you can transcend them, and you can be even happier when things go your way. But don't expect things to always go your way. Be sameach b'chalko. Whatever Hashem gives us is wonderful. Be happy with it, and be able to say for ourselves, Shnei Chayei Sarah, that every single moment I want to be here dealing with whatever I'm dealing with. Lesson number 2, we talked about Livkota. Avraham Avinu didn't cry a super amount. He just dealt with a major challenge, but he did not regret the mitzvah of the Kedah. It led to Sarah's death. Doesn't matter. I did the mitzvah that Hashem commanded me to do. I separate that from what happened with Sarah. Hashem decides when people pass away, he was able to separate. He didn't want anybody to think that he was crying about the mitzvah that he did, to make sure haser satan me'acharenu, even after we do something good. Don't allow the Yetzer Hara to convince us that perhaps we shouldn't have done it. Always be thrilled with the fact that we did our mitzvot. We went to lesson number 3, Abraham versus Noach. Abraham got up, Vayakam Abraham, after his suffering and sadness, and he moved forward with life. Noach did not. Noach was plunged into sadness, drank, became drunk. Greatness is how we deal with those moments of sadness and loss. And let's be like Avraham Avinu and the people of Israel and our individual lives, pick up and continue and move forward. We had lesson number 4. We had Hebron. Just remember that Hebron is ours. It's meaningful. There's deep, deep, deep spiritual significance to it as the gateway to Gan Eden. Always have that perspective when we're dealing with the difficult political issues of our time. Lesson number 5. Why did Avraham Avinu want a daughter-in-law, not from Canaan, but from elsewhere, even though they were idolaters? Midot, morality, values, that is what is important. Things in the mind can change, the values and the midot cannot. Lesson number 6, moving on, we talked about what was the test For Rivka, it wasn't just doing chesed, it was the extra level of chesed. Saying, I'm going to give you water. Let him hear those words that water is coming. Like Nachamish Gamazu felt he failed. And Rivka rose to the challenge. She was worthy of being Avraham Avinu's family. She went that extra mile, that extra sensitivity in chesed. Let's be that way as well. Lesson number 7, the Avraham Avinu muzzling his animals, such care and concern, making sure that he doesn't in any way take anything that belongs to someone else. Let's make sure that we're people like that. Lesson number 8, tefillah. Take our prayer and turn it into a sicha, communication, where we pour our hearts out to Hashem in our own words. That is real tefillah. And then finally, lesson number 9, living every single day so that we know when we leave this world, we are satisfied, like Avraham Avinu. We've spent our life, doesn't matter, the good, the bad, the challenges, what happens, family, etc. I did something meaningful today. I touched people's lives. I educated people. I inspired people. I helped people. I made a contribution to the world, whatever it is, to make sure that we're living lives in that meaningful way. And that is learning the lesson of Avraham Avinu. So much to learn from Avraham and Sarah. We've now finished with them in terms of their contribution to lessons that we can learn. Let's each of us take one of these 9 lessons and internalize them, make them a part of our lives. And Bezrat Hashem, from that, we'll grow as better people. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.